Hi there. My name is David Nieborg. I'm a associate professor at the University of Toronto. I have a graduate appointment at the Faculty of Information downtown, and my undergraduate home, as they say, is the University of Toronto Scarborough at the Department of Arts, Culture, and Media. I consider myself a professor of media studies. In this short lecture or short talk, I want to tell you more about my research on this topic, platforms and power, platform power, and I'm going to specifically focus on advertising to make it less abstract. And this is a project I've been working on last year. So here we go. I'm going to start with giving you some more context of where I'm coming from intellectually, etc. The reason I'm providing this talk is because my research has been supported by the Jackman Humanities Institute, and they also allowed me to work last year physically in Princeton, New Jersey at the Institute of Advanced Study. This is a picture. So this is where I worked last year, and the theme of last year's group, there were 25 scholars in the School of Social Science, and together we worked with a large subgroup on the theme of platforms, which is really my scholarly expertise. So I'm telling you this because this is where I was, but also what I've been working on this year. To give you a bit more context even of my work, this is my scholarship together with my co-authors. I'm calling them out because the work I've been doing is very collaborative with mostly with Netherlands-based Dutch media scholars. José van Dijk, she is at the Utrecht University together with her co-author Thomas Poole. They wrote the book The Platform Society. My name is not on the cover, but I contributed to that book in spirit, and it's also sort of a spiritual predecessor of the work we're doing right now as a group. A more recent book that I was very much involved in is Platforms and Cultural Production. That book is already out. Together again with Thomas Poole and a Cornell-based professor, Brooke Aaron Duffy. We worked on the question on how platform companies like Meta, Facebook, Google, these days TikTok, etc., how they impact cultural production. We specifically focused on video games, on journalism, creators, as they call them these days, or influencers. The book is translated in Italian if you speak that language, and just very recently it was translated and came out in Chinese and Mandarin. Currently we're working on a third book, so it's sort of a trilogy. The first book, The Platform Society, really thinks about values and then implicitly European values in a connected world. So the Platform Society demonstrate a tension between values of US-based and increasingly China-based platform companies like Google, Facebook, etc., and European values and norms. And the Platform Society tries to make that more explicit. In the book Platform Power, which is the work we're doing right now, we're in the process of writing this book, we sort of follow up on that first book and pick up themes of the second book. And that's what I want to talk about in this talk. This new book, the forthcoming book, talks about this theme and what really wants to center this notion of platform power, which is a term that definitely is not our term or beholden to us. It's bandied around, I could almost say, by a lot of our colleagues across a variety of fields. What we try to contribute to that conversation is to add more specificity to this notion by calling it institutional platform power, which is more specific than other forms of platform power. Again, these platforms can be Uber for transportation or Airbnb for housing, but also then your Facebooks and your Googles, etc. Our focus and our understanding and our current definition of this notion is the ability of platform conglomerates to sustain and influence and impede the action of other institutions through economic and infrastructural and regulatory interventions. And a number of themes or notions to focus on in this definition. We very much focus on dominant platforms. This notion of dominance comes out of economic literature. Platforms who really, in their markets, in their ecosystem, have a outsized role or outsized influence. In that sense, they're powerful or dominant. And frequently there are conglomerates in the traditional sense of the word, like your conglomerates, like your General Electric, Samsung, and others. Canada, of course, has a serious amount of conglomerates as well, which are these diversified, highly integrated corporations that operate traditionally globally or at least internationally. Our focus then is how these platform companies interact with, forge relationships, institutional relationships, not so much with end users. Our focus is not on how algorithms determine what you see as an end user, as a user, you and me, consuming or using platforms like your TikTok or Facebook. But instead, we're interested in the relationship with so-called complementers, other corporations, predominantly, and sometimes governments, but we focus mostly on corporations, other corporations that create content. It can be game developers, it can be a journalist, but in the industry I'm going to talk about today, advertising, it can be, those complementers can be third parties, other corporations that provide additional or complementary services to the platform. This form of power is very much relational. What we mean by that is platforms exist by virtue of creating these relationships, setting up infrastructures and markets where they can provide other companies, these complementers, an ability to provide services. So in that sense, that power is distributed, because if a platform does not have a relationship with complementers, there is nothing to distribute, and in the sense that power is distributed. So without its drivers, Uber is pretty useless. Without people renting out their houses or apartments, Airbnb is pretty useless. So in that sense, this power is distributed, and it's also contingent, meaning that it's very dynamic. It's constantly in flux and changing. So this is our working definition, which then feeds into this book. And the goal of this book is to provide a framework, very much, to analyze this form of institutional platform power I just described. The reason to do so is we want to provide more conceptual clarity. If people and scholars and regulators and students say, oh, platforms are powerful, what do they and what do we mean by that? So we want to be able to locate that power within markets and in infrastructures. That in and by itself, this first step, is already incredibly complex and challenging. To be able to do that, we also need to examine how power accumulates. How do platforms become conglomerates in the first place? How have Google and Meta and Apple, etc., how have they arrived at such positions of power in such complex ecosystems? If we know that, then we can analyze through specific case studies. And in this talk, I'm going to give you a very brief example of such a case study, how such power is exercised, or you could say operationalized. If you have done that and you know how power is operationalized through very specific examples, through very specific markets, then you can determine if it's harmful, not only harmful in the economic sense, but also infrastructural sense, or there are all kinds of ways where consumers, or maybe we should even say citizens, could be harmed by the outsized influence of platforms. And as I'm recording this, there are ample examples of platform companies and their mercurial CEOs and executives exercising power through their platforms in a variety of ways. If we have done that, then we can evaluate instruments or design instruments to regulate that platform power, because increasingly such power is, at least I hope we can agree on that, is outsized, or it's more dominant than in traditional markets, and we think that power typically should be curtailed. This should allow for more analytical precision. To go through these steps, we can use specific methods and data that results in specific case studies that can help feed into legal scholarship, which really we've seen our work benefiting legal scholars, political science scholarship, and sociological scholarship, and other fields of research. Okay, so to give you even more sense of where we're coming from, past work where we started exploring these themes, if you're interested in this kind of work, we have some papers, some exploratory papers where we think through these issues. If you find this interesting, this open access paper talks about sort of these concepts and themes I just discussed, reframing platform power. You can download this paper on the Journal of Internet Policy Review. So this is with my co-authors. It seems a bit older, so you can see this project has been a long time coming. Then more recently, last year, we did a special issue. We did that special issue also for Internet Policy Review to advance this thinking, to locate and theorize platform power. And hopefully by now, after hearing me talk for a couple of minutes about this, you get a better sense of why we use these terms, locating, theorizing, what we mean by platform power. In this introduction or editorial, we introduce these notions. And then here on the screen, you see a number of like really high quality, a variety of papers. It's all open access, so I recommend digging into this. Papers on economic instances of platform power. That's the second paper. Brokerage and retail trading platforms. A paper by Stine Lomborg and her colleagues, Danish scholars, how to account for infrastructural power. A brilliant early career researcher, Diewertje Luitse from University of Amsterdam, of platform power and AI, really advanced work also, again, locating and theorizing platform power. If you read one paper, and you want to understand AI and the politics and the infrastructural politics of AI companies better, wow, this is one to look out for. The current work I'm going to discuss in the next couple of slides is in dialogue with the work of colleagues like Nick Kara from University of Queensland and his colleagues on tuned advertising, etc. So if I can go down this list, on the right side you see more papers, and all of them talk about these concepts. Okay, so if we having discussed these broader themes and this context, I want to talk you through through an example of how to analyze platform power, and we've done so through a proof of concept paper. That's this paper. It's out today. It's very recent, as you can see. This is going to be a chapter in our book. So if you're interested in this material, this is something I've worked on last year. And it's about these institutional relationships. And now hopefully you see what we mean by that. A paper that analyzes these relationships that are constantly evolving. We call them contingent. And we focus on the digital advertising ecosystem. It's an open access paper, so you can download it anytime. Let me talk you through this paper and our argument, so you get a better sense of what this paper is about, and then hopefully what the book is about. The paper takes as its starting point the digital advertising industry. Why is this industry so relevant? Well, it's the economic engine of the digital economy. That's not our observation. That is widely accepted just by virtue of should I say this? Yeah. Insane amount of money, $600 billion globally, and a large amount of growth is projected. Digital ad spend to go through all of these. We're all very familiar with this, and if you are in business yourself, you know this, but it bears repeating. What this means is that if you hold any kind of power in this ecosystem, you're guaranteed to make many millions, if not billions of dollars. So there's literally a lot at stake here. A minuscule stake translates into significant amount of money. However, this is a famous slide that has been used by anybody that lectures on this topic. The digital advertising ecosystem is famously complex. I can add some more adjectives to that, but it's radically complex. It's holy moly. On the right hand side, you see people or as they call them, eyeballs or inventory publishers, people who have apps or tools or websites, newspapers, streaming website, etc., where people come together and they can monetize, as they say. So it's a supply side. And then on the left, you see the demand side. So people who want to advertise their goods, like your, whatever somebody wants to sell. And as you can see, in between there are dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of intermediaries. There are agencies who provide specific services to marketers and advertisers. There are DSPs, demand side platforms. There are all kinds of ad exchanges in the middle at the top. What's so important here is that this market seems, and that's what this picture wants to indicate, is that this market seems relatively open. So the barrier to market entrance is relatively low. Compared to other markets, you can still enter this market on the supply side or on the demand side. You can aggregate supply, you can aggregate demand, or you can provide specific services. The fact that there are so many of these specific small companies, and some of them are really, really big or large or multi-billion-dollar companies, but some of them are much smaller outfits. They're new startups. Some of them probably don't exist anymore, etc. Some of them are not even companies you might traditionally associate with this ecosystem, yet they make a significant amount of revenue by being present and active in this. The point here is this ecosystem is relatively open. Many of startups still can enter this market and ecosystem, and they still do. Yet, if we know that this market is relatively open, how can it be that this market is also very concentrated? And that's this slide that shows that, is that the red line is Google, the black line is Facebook or Meta, and together they capture worldwide the majority of ad revenue spent, which is unprecedented and incredibly significant. This is not something we would argue, accept or take for granted. These are also platform companies. That's why our research comes in and becomes relevant, right? Facebook, Google, Alibaba, Amazon, and Tencent are all traditional platform companies, or platform conglomerates, as we call them. So on the one hand, you have an open market, yet this market is very concentrated and sort of dominated, as we say, by a handful, a small group of transnational conglomerates. This is this programmatic supply chain. I'm showing you this because I want to call attention to ask you, and this is the question that became before us, why? Why is there this concentration? Well, on the sell side, there is openness. So people who have all kinds of eyeballs to present. But on the sell side, there's also a tendency to aggregate. And on the demand side as well. So on both of the sides of the markets, is an incentive to aggregate supply and demand, but also in the middle. You see the ad exchange, the most successful and biggest ad exchange in this ecosystem is owned and operated, you're probably not surprised, by Google, because this ecosystem, and the point here is how do you say this? It's clear that everybody active in this space benefits from aggregating data. And what we found is that this data is coming out of a very specific place, and the institutional actor, or the company that is able to aggregate so much data, is essentially the dominant actor. So this is not our observation. There has been a landmark lawsuit, US v. Google. We'll see if this lawsuit is going to go through and what the implications will be with new administrations in the US and elsewhere. But this is a graph from that lawsuit where it has been made very clear that even though this market is very open and vital parts of this market, this really complex world of publishers, advertisers, supply, demand, Google holds a dominant market share. So on the supply side, it holds 90%. On the demand side, on the right, it holds 80% of ads, ad networks, and then demand side platforms. These are more automated ways of trading. But most importantly, in the middle, the ad exchanges, these are automated, or as they call it, programmatic auctions. Google has the most important one, Google Ad Exchange. It has a 50% market share. So if you see all this, you start to understand how platform power hopefully operates, and why Google is so important in this, and how data functions. Because all these arrows, what they signal is these bit requests and bit responses. So you open a phone and you see an advertisement is driven by data, often real-time data. So we ask this question: how are data infrastructures involved in the exercise of power and control over the digital advertising ecosystem, and why are so few institutional actors so dominant? We do this through a very specific case study, because this ecosystem is so complex that just mapping it out doesn't really get to the point of why Google is so dominant here. Through a very specific case study of Apple, where Apple plays a key role. It's called App Tracking Transparency, ATT. In 2001, Apple introduced a new way of preventing advertisers to track data. And why is this relevant? Well, if you open an app and you get an advertising, that phone sends out a very specific data signal, or better said, advertisers can read the IDFA, the advertising ID of your phone, which is a piece of data that is incredibly crucial, because it allows advertisers to know where you are and who you are and where your device is. It might not know your exact name and age and even location, but it can track your device across web and app ecosystems. And because it can do so, it can build a very comprehensive profile of you as a user. All of this can be done because Apple, in its devices, in its iPhones, in its iPad, provides a signal. It provides a data signal through its operating system. And then in 2021, Apple said, no, advertisers do not have access to this anymore, access to this data signal. So how did we arrive at this example? Well, we started gathering developer documentation, we reviewed lawsuits, and we read a lot of financial disclosure information of companies like Meta, Snapchat, and Apple. And by reading through this and analyzing this, we found that this persistent identifier was, as they call it, deprecated, which means that the sell and buy side could no longer be connected. There were far less persistent identifiers to see which device was active at which time. So the bits from buyers and sellers were less informed, or not informed at all. So that means that if you're an advertiser and you want to sell your bread to people in Toronto, for example, in the past, because the iPhone devices or iOS devices sent out this identifier, you could see where people were, where those devices were. By Apple in 2021 saying, no, you can no longer have access to this signal, there was sort of a firewall put up, which had a massive ramifications for this ecosystem. What kind of ramifications? Well, here you see after 2021, companies like Meta and Facebook suffered, that may not be the right word, but their revenue was significantly impacted by this decision by Apple. Same thing for Snap or Snapchat, but there are other publicly listed companies that after 2021 were deeply impacted because they had less accurate data. So again, if you find this interesting, it's kind of a complex story. I hope you were able to follow along. It took us much more than a year to write this up and get to the bottom of this, because this ecosystem is so complex. But if you find this interesting and this debate and analysis of platform power interesting, I recommend downloading this paper, which again is a chapter in the book. We'll have other chapters like it. Okay, this is the end of my brief talk. I hope I have given you a sense of what our research is about on platform power. And if you have any questions or comments about this, here is my email address on the slide. And feel free to reach out anytime.